Hey everyone, we're going to look at how to complete the square, and then we're going to tie it into the lesson from Unit 9.1, which talks about finding and writing the equations and graphing the equations of circles. So, first off, we're looking for a pattern in the first question. Looking for a pattern of how we would figure out the difference between the linear coefficient and the constant term. So, up in the top there's three examples. They have an example like this where it's completing the square, where you have a square of some term, which means, again, there's two of each of them. So if we were to multiply these out, kind of like you do in algebra, which would be FOIL, you'd get x times x, which is x squared, x times 3, 3x, x times 3, 3x, and then 3 times 3, which would be 9. So really what you'd end up with, and I'm going to write it below, would be x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now I'm going to kind of shorten the middle step that I did and just do the last step for the next two. So like the second one would be x squared minus 16x plus 64. And the third one's going to be x squared plus 14x plus 49. So it's talking about, is there a pattern? And in this case, there is a pattern. So the linear term, the middle term, the ones I'm underlining right now, are the linear terms. And the linear term is double the number in the parentheses. I'm just going to kind of abbreviate that. And then the constant value, I'll actually underline that in green. The constant value, which in this case was 9, 64, 49, the constant value is the square of that number in parentheses. I'm just kind of abbreviating it to fit it in here. Of number. So then we're going to come up with a kind of a way to figure out how to can figure out if these are perfect squares or not, using those two ideas. So if you look at the three examples below, A, B, and C, trying to figure out if the following are perfect squares. So could we take this and write it into something like this? Okay. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take the b value. So we have a quadratic equation with three number values. We're going to use that b value to our advantage. And what we're going to do to figure out if it's a perfect square or not is we're going to take that b value, divide it by 2, and square it. So in this case, for this one, the b value is 2. So if I get 2 out when I do this, then that means it's going to be a perfect square. So like in this case, it'd be 2 divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 would be 1. But 1 squared is going to equal 1. So like this first one's a no. It's not a perfect square. B, on the other hand, will be a yes. Because if we take that term right there, 6 divided by 2, and square it, we do get 9. And then for the last one, it's a yes also. Because if you take 4, divide it by 2, and square it, you end up getting 4. So in the case of B and C, those are perfect squares. That number that we got when we divided by 2, 3, this is what that would come out to be. And this one would be x plus 2 squared. So when you divide 4 by 2, you get 2, which would be the number in the parentheses. Because it's double the number in the parentheses is our linear term. So I'm going to go ahead and erase what we did so far. And then we're going to move on to the next part. We're going to find the constant value. So in this case right now, I know my linear value is 12, so I'm going to use that value, divide it by 2, and square it. So the number in question that I want to get out for this would be 36. And again, that would mean that this would be the same as x plus 6 squared. And then for b, similar, we got negative 6. Okay. So like in this case for this one, that answer would be 9. And then c would be one where you would get a decimal. So why don't you try that one right now. Try c on your own. And then have myself call me over to check that one for you. So now what we're going to do is we're going to relate this to finding the equation for a circle. So you'll see in the equation that we have for a, there are x's and y's. So what we're going to have to do is complete the square for both of those. Now again, the idea with writing the equation for a circle is we want to be able to figure out first the equation, but we also want to relate it to what the center of the circle is. So what's the center of that circle going to be? It's going to be a coordinate. And then we also want to figure out what the radius is going to end up being in the end. So what we're going to do first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this negative 8 and we're going to move that to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to write out the equation. And if I add 8 to both sides, I'm going to get 8 on the right side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to complete the square on the x's and the y's. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to leave a space for each of them. And then what I'm going to do is use our little formula we used on the front page with each linear term to fill in those spaces. Now the only difference with this is that whenever I decide to add on the left side, I got to add it on the right side to the 8. So if I do the x squared plus 4x, if I divide 4 by 2 and square it, I get 4. And then with the next one, if I use the negative 2 over here and divide it by 2 and square it, I'm going to get 1. So the one thing I got to do now is make sure that I add that 4 and the 1. I added it on the left side already. I got to make sure I add it on the right side. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write my equation out as those completed square, so I have it in that standard form. So the 4 divided by 2 was 2, so that means that would be x plus 2 squared. And then if I do negative 2 divided by 2 would be negative 1, so I'm going to be adding that to y minus 1 squared. And then that's going to equal 13. So now I can figure out the center. The center for this is going to be negative 2, 1. It's the opposite of the x and y values that are in the parentheses. And then the radius is the square root of 13, which would be a decimal, so I'm going to leave it as that. So what I'd like you to do right now is try to do b on your own, and then call me over to check it.